The most expensive weapon ever built almost died, not in combat, not from a missile, from 2,200 pounds. The F-35 program will cost the United States $1.7 trillion over its lifetime. That is more money than the GDP of Australia, and this aircraft, this $1.7 trillion machine, came within 2 years of being canceled entirely, because it was too fat. Here is exactly how the most powerful fighter jet ever built almost collapsed under its own weight, twice. This is the aircraft that broke every budget, rewrote every engineering rule, and almost never flew. The F-35 was supposed to be simple. One aircraft, 3 versions, shared across the Air Force, the Navy, and the Marines. The idea was elegant on paper. One production line, shared parts, shared training, shared logistics, massive cost savings. What actually happened was the opposite of elegant. Because those 3 branches don't just want different things, they want physically contradictory things. The Air Force needs a fast, high-altitude conventional fighter. The Navy needs a rugged carrier aircraft that can survive being slammed onto a flight deck at 150 miles per hour. The Marines need a jet that can hover and land vertically on a ship the size of a parking lot. Most people assume the F-35 almost died because the military pushed too hard for speed or stealth or technology. That is not what happened. But here is where it gets genuinely strange. The real enemy was a number so simple, so ordinary, that it sounds almost embarrassing. The F-35 almost died because of weight. What makes this even stranger is the pilot's helmet. Not every F-35 pilot wears a helmet that costs $400,000, a single spare. More expensive than most fighter jets from the 1970s, and it took over 10 years and 3 complete redesigns before that the helmet worked reliably enough to actually use in flight. That detail tells you everything about how this program ran. Here is the fundamental engineering trap the F-35 walked into. Every requirement adds weight. Stealth coatings, weight. Advanced radar, weight. Strengthened carrier landing gear, weight. The Marines' vertical lift system, a lot of weight. Now here's the problem. More weight means you need a bigger wing to generate enough lift. A bigger wing means a larger radar reflection. Your stealth is gone, so you shrink the wing. A smaller wing means the jet is less maneuverable in close combat. Less maneuverable means you need more advanced sensors to fight from long range. More advanced sensors, more weight. Do you see the loop? Every fix creates a new problem. Every problem solution creates a new constraint. Engineers call this a weight death spiral. Think of it like packing a carry-on bag for a week-long trip. Every item you add forces you to pull something out. And the thing you pulled out was actually essential. By 2006, the program was deep inside that spiral. Then, in 2004, something happened that almost ended everything. Engineers were running standard structural fatigue tests on the F-35A airframe, the Air Force version. Fatigue testing means you mechanically simulate years of flight stress in a laboratory. You bend the aircraft, load it, stress it, thousands of cycles, compressing a 20-year service life into months. The F-35A cracked, not at the end of the test, at 80% of its required lifespan. The airframe had never flown a combat sortie. And it had already structurally failed. The entire structural engineering foundation of the program had to be reconsidered. Then came 2007. Lockheed Martin's engineers delivered news that nearly stopped the program cold. The F-35B, the Marine Corps variant, the one with vertical landing capability, was 2,200 pounds overweight. 2,200 pounds. The Marine Corps told Congress directly, "Fix this in 2 years, or we are buying F-18S instead." The engineering problem seemed almost unsolvable. because the weight wasn't coming from one source you could remove. It was distributed across the entire airframe, in the structure, in the systems, in the vertical lift hardware that made the Marine variant unique. And that vertical lift system, that is where things get truly extraordinary. The Marines needed vertical landing because their ships are not aircraft carriers. They operate from amphibious assault ships, smaller vessels with no catapult, no arresting cables, just a flat deck the size of a football field. The original solution, used by the British Harrier jet, was to tilt the engine's exhaust nozzle downward. Direct jet thrust pointed at the ground. The F-35B doesn't do that, because that solution wastes enormous amounts of thrust fighting the aircraft's own weight distribution. Instead, Lockheed's engineers designed something that had never been put into a production combat aircraft before. Behind the cockpit, forward of the engine, they buried a completely separate 50-inch diameter fan. This fan is connected to the main engine by a mechanical drive shaft and a clutch, exactly like the clutch in your car's gearbox, but built to transfer enough torque to rip a steel beam in half. When the pilot engages hover mode, that clutch locks in. The shaft spins at over 9,500 revolutions per minute. The fan generates 18,000 pounds of thrust, pointing straight down. At the same time, the main engine's rear nozzle rotates to point downward, adding its own thrust. The aircraft is balanced on two columns of air like a seesaw. The flight computer adjusts both thrust sources simultaneously, thousands of times per second, keeping the jet stable to within millimeters. Imagine balancing a pencil on your fingertip. Now, make that pencil weigh 32,000 pounds and set it on fire. Oh, that is what the F-35B's hover system is doing every time a Marine pilot brings it to a stop in midair. Now, that misconception about why the program almost failed. Remember what most people think killed this program? Speed, stealth, technology. The Lockheed engineers fixed the 2,200-pound weight problem not by removing capability, but by redesigning every structural component simultaneously. They reduced wall thickness on non-load-bearing airframe sections. They changed composite layup schedules across 40% of the skin panels. They eliminated redundant structural brackets that legacy design practice had carried over from metal airframe thinking. In 18 months, they lost weight, not by compromising the aircraft, by making the engineering more precise. The F-35A structural crack? That required reinforcing the wing carry-through structure, the main spar that connects both wings through the fuselage. Engineers added a secondary load path so that if the primary structure developed a fatigue crack, the second path would carry the load and keep the aircraft flyable. And the Navy variant, the F-35C, had to survive 25G arrested landings, 25 times the force of gravity, compressing into the landing gear and the airframe structure in under 2 seconds. That is the equivalent of a 75,000-pound truck dropping directly onto the aircraft's tailhook attachment point. The solution required redesigning the entire aft fuselage structure of the C variant, adding a dedicated load transfer frame that distributed that impact force across a larger area of the airframe instead of concentrating it at a single point. And the result is 3 aircraft that share 70% of their parts, but each with structural modifications so precisely targeted that from the outside, they look nearly identical. But the number that really puts this into perspective is 8.6 million. The F-35 runs on 8.6 million lines of operational flight software, more than the space shuttle's entire avionics system. And here's the part that changes how you see this aircraft. The F-35 is deliberately aerodynamically unstable. No pilot's reflexes are fast enough to fly it unaided. Without the software running, the aircraft falls out of the sky. The code is not a feature. The code is the aircraft. But here's what most people don't realize. The structural engineering crisis that nearly killed the F-35B in 2007, the desperate hunt to remove 2,200 pounds from an airframe that had already been designed, produced something unexpected. The analysis methods Lockheed's engineers developed during that crisis, specifically high-fidelity finite element modeling of composite load paths under combined stress conditions, were adopted by commercial aerospace. Boeing's 787 Dreamliner program, Airbus's A350. Both programs used advances in composite structural analysis that trace a direct lineage back to the emergency weight reduction campaign on a fighter jet that almost got canceled. The techniques developed to save a military aircraft that was too heavy ended up making commercial aircraft lighter, stronger, and 25% more fuel efficient on long-haul routes. The F-35's near-death experience is now inside the wings of every 787 flying passengers across the Pacific. Think about that. The most troubled, most expensive, most controversial military program in history accidentally made civilian aviation better. Engineering doesn't waste its failures, it recycles them. The F-35 is not a perfect aircraft. It is something more interesting than perfect. It is the solution to a problem that should have been impossible, built by engineers who were told twice that it was already over. Now, here is the question I want you to answer in the comments. The U.S. military spent $1.7 trillion betting that one multi-role fighter jet is better than maintaining 3 separate specialized aircraft. Was that bet worth it, or did the compromises required to satisfy 3 branches produce a machine that doesn't fully excel at anything? Real answer: no wrong responses. If you want to understand the engineering behind why carrier landings are considered the most dangerous routine maneuver in all of aviation, I've already broken that down in full. It's right here.